So it's always helpful to have a mnemonic, and when you're thinking about your teaching, you might want to consider ailments. And so it's always useful to think about the purpose and the intended aim of your session. So you might have an overall or overarching aim. So in this session today, we really want you to understand a bit about QMEC and get a bit of a basic understanding of who we are and our teaching methods. But within that, we've got more specific learning outcomes. We're going to be talking about different forms of educational theory and, our rationale for teaching the way that we do. You can break the overall arching aims down into more specific outcomes. Now, these might be set by you, or they might be set for each session by, the medical school. But sometimes you will have free reign. We've talked about the need to do a learning needs analysis, and I think it's a really important step, as I say, that sometimes people forget. You really need to know where your learner is at. Certainly as a teacher, you have a lot of control over kind of, the various methods you might try. And we are going to try lots of different teaching styles and techniques and methods in the face-to-face practice that you can employ, and just use a variety of methods. I always think it's important to end a session with, what have your students got out of it? What are they a bit kind of confused about? What might their next steps be? So the evaluation and next steps are hugely crucial. Now, tests and assessments might be something that, you don't necessarily do within a teaching session, but might be more formal assessment. But, you could do a quick kind of summary. And the way I prefer to do a summary to really bring together the end of a session. Some teachers I know will summarize the session themselves. I will ask the students to do that. If I've got a group of students, I will ask each of them to tell me what one of their take home points was, or something that they've learned. And actually hearing everybody else's learning points kind of provides a group summary. And then if I feel I need to add anything to it, I can. So I hope that just gives you a bit of a framework that you might be able to think about when you're structuring your own teaching. And thinking a little bit more about the strategies that you might use. This is from the Evidence-Based Teaching Network website. Lots of very user-friendly kind of tips. And these are their top 10 teaching strategies. I always like a good analogy because it just reminds me of, just I don't know, just sticks in my mind. My students or colleagues will always know that I have a note, a notebook, and I'm continuously sort of, if I'm in a teaching session, I normally say to my students, well, these days I'll say, get your phone out so you can take some notes, and that, or something you want to look up. I think it's really important, going back to our learning needs analysis, that we need to just reinforce things, and that might be via repetition, or just going back over things that they had said were their goals, working together as teams to really kind of build upon their knowledge, and test out their hypothesis. And just thinking about, preparing them in advance and giving them, maybe some of our students, a bit of information beforehand that you can then build on. Actually, we don't need to do all the work within the session. Some of the work, especially with online learning, can be done beforehand.
I'm going to talk a bit about feedback now, and that it and some of the important aspects of feedback. So for me, feedback always forms quite a big part of the actual teaching, and it's certainly quite really useful for students to get individualized feedback, but it's important that it's done in a way, and there are some rules which I'm going to talk through, that just considers what it's like to sort of receive feedback. So one of the things is that it should be agreed and invited by the learner. So the learner needs to be ready to receive that feedback. It should be relevant, and targeted. So based on the specific learning encounters that have just taken place, and usually if it's done in a timely manner, so as soon after the learning encounter as possible, it's much more likely to be effective and useful. It should always be non-judgmental. The actual feedback that you're giving should be clear and specific and based on observed behaviours rather than your sort of emotional reactions, and the, the in that way, when it's specific and it's about specific behaviours, you can then give tips and suggestions for improvement and how things can be changed for the better. So what they could do differently next time. Overall, it's good for the feedback to be balanced, and that can sometimes be challenging. You should aim for sort of more positive feedback, but also give areas for improvement, and therefore the feedback will be constructive. And obviously it sort of goes without saying, but you're sort of giving suggestions rather than saying you need to do this next time. But try to encourage the students to reflect on their own sort of performance and come to those come to the feedback themselves, and possibly the things that they can do moving forwards to improve the performance. So things like goals on what they can work on for next time. So here are just a few phrases that you might want to have up your sleeve when you're giving feedback. So I noticed that. So that's based on a behaviour. How were you feeling when? So again, getting them to reflect on what they were doing and why they did that. What were your thoughts? And how might you do that differently? So there are various different feedback models, and some of these you might have used. Personally, I tend to use the Pendleton's rules, particularly as that gets the whole group involved in giving the feedback. And again, this usually can form quite a big chunk of the teaching session, and get some really good discussion going. You might want to have a look at some of these different feedback models, and we'll be discussing and thinking about them a bit more in the live session.